It's been 3 months, and the Seattle NHL franchise has a name. Rain City Bitch Pigeons, you're deemed flightless. Seattle Battle Cattle, you're being put to pasture. The tentacles are rising. There are some naysayers, but who cares? Release the Kraken. In these last few months, seemingly everybody has jumped on board the Kraken. After almost half a century of betrayal, it's been a long waiting for Seattle and the NHL. A long waiting.
Ocean man, take me by the hand, lead me to the land that you understand. Ocean man, the voyage to the corner of the globe is a real trip. Ocean man, the crust of a tan man, and by the sand, soaking up the thirst of the land. Ocean man, can you see through the wonder of a...
There's been a few close calls for the Emerald City ever since the Seattle Metropolitans called it quits in 1924. You see, in the late 50s, the NHL had a competitor, one that was threatening to invade the West. This challenger called itself the Western Hockey League. The WHL, founded as the Pacific Coast Hockey League in 1948, then known as the Western Canada Senior Hockey League in 1951, before finally changing into the easier to remember WHL in 1952, was a minor pro league that initially had teams in typical West Coast markets like Vancouver and Winnipeg. But then the 1960s came, and with it the promise of large West Coast markets. Teams in Los Angeles and San Francisco were added, and eventually San Diego and Phoenix. There began to be rumors the WHL and fellow minor league, the AHL, would merge into a major league rival. The two leagues would interplay multiple times, and the NHL would jumpstart their expansion into the West. While they would lose LA and the San Francisco Bay Area to the NHL, one of the mainstays was Seattle. The team would be founded in 1943 as the NIHL's Seattle Ironmen. Name changes to the Bombers and the Americans would follow, settling on Totems for 1958. The team struggled these years, with the only bright spot being a winger named Guile Fielder. Eventually, with the name change came success, with the newly named Totems capturing their first Patrick Cup in 1959. 2 more cups in 1967 and 1968 would eventually follow, as well as a string of finals appearances. These years were led by players like Bill McFarland, Jerry Leonard, and Mark Bolio, all top players in the WHL, but no room in a 6-team NHL. Then there was Fielder, who was really good. Really good. Good enough that despite only playing 9 games in the NHL, he still holds the record for 4th in most points in professional hockey. Meanwhile, the WHL was not on solid ground. Having lost Vancouver to the NHL as well, they were hit by an even bigger rival.
The WHA.
Having 18 NHL teams, 12 WHA teams, and several other minor leagues by 1974, the talent pool was very diluted. With many of the WHA teams also in the West, the WHL simply could not compete and closed its doors after the 1973-74 season. 1974 was also very good for the Seattle Totems. Having spent the last few years in financial turmoil and joining the Central Hockey League in 1974, the NHL, having just accepted the Kansas City Scouts and Washington Capitals for their most recent expansion, decided to add 2 more teams. On June 12, 1974, the NHL announced 2 teams would be added for the 1976-77 season in Denver and Seattle. Getting the Seattle team were a group of investors led by this man, Vincent H.D. Abbey. Abbey, a Seattle lawyer and former amateur player, was a stockholder of the Totems since the beginning. He had seen the team through their 3 Patrick Cups and was not going to let the team go. Suddenly, Seattle had NHL fever. The Seattle Center Coliseum would grow the capacity from 12,300 to the NHL requirement of 15,000 seats. Everything was great, except for the fact that Abbey missed several financial deadlines and had trouble securing financing. By 1975, expansion did not look like a good idea to the NHL. The territory war it had waged with the WHA had led to way too many teams for the United States to support. The WHA was seeing multiple teams move or fold, sometimes midway through the season. Abbey rejected an offer to buy a WHA team, as well as failing to acquire the existing Pittsburgh Penguins, who were sold in a bankruptcy auction for $4.4 million. This proved to not be a good idea. The NHL quietly pulled the Seattle and Denver expansion teams, and soon after, the Seattle Totems folded after 1 year in the CHL. Denver would get their NHL team as the Kansas City Scouts moved to become the Colorado Rockies. Abbey was enraged as he had repurchased $6 million in shares from Vancouver and filed a suit for antitrust violations against the NHL, finally ending in a verdict in favor of the NHL in 1986. While the Seattle Totems were history, Seattle's hopes for the NHL were going for round 2. In 1990, for the first time since that failed 1976 expansion, the NHL announced it was opening up bids for expansion spots for the 1992-93 season. Seattle decided, hey, second time's a charm. And Silicon Valley millionaire Chris Larson and Bill Ackerley, son of Supersonics owner Barry, would enter rival bids. With a $50 million expansion fee, the two sides decided to pool their resources. This group seemed to have everything going great. Their fall 1990 presentation sat very well with NHL executives, who were very on board with who was behind the team and the prospect of a new arena. When the group came to pitch to the Board of Governors, Ackerley asked to speak to the board in private first. When he came out 10 minutes later, it turned out he had informed them that the Seattle group was withdrawing their application. This was news to Larson. The bid was in Ackerley's name. Although Larson's group still pitched, the damage was done, and Tampa Bay and Ottawa would get the expansion teams. Why Ackerley pulled the bid is not clear. Bill McFarland, who led the Larson-backed bid, would state his belief that Ackerley wanted to keep a competitor to the Supersonics out of the Coliseum. The arena, which got a renovation to 17,000 seats, would be renamed Key Arena, and would serve as the home to the Supersonics until their move to Oklahoma City in 2008. The Kraken came into existence after half a century of poor business moves, doomed leagues, and owners who felt like fucking over their partners. But whatever the case, that's all in the past. The Kraken have been released.